In 2010, the University of Michigan did a research project in the psychology of prejudice. They were interested in trying to understand why so many of us, when presented with facts contrary to our beliefs, do not seem to be very inclined to change our beliefs. One of the researchers involved mentioned the very specific case from politics in that year, back when the governor of Arizona, Jan Brewer, had said in a speech that Border Patrol agents had found bodies out in the desert that had been decapitated. She was, as you recall, famous for ginning up fear of illegal immigrants that were crossing the border from Mexico into Arizona. So news agencies called border agents to find out how many bodies were decapitated and where were they, and they were like, none, zip, it's never happened. Obviously, Governor Brewer had heard stories about the drug cartel wars in Mexico, where there had been some decapitations, and had translated that into Arizona, that illegal immigrants had crossed the border and come up and killed some people by cutting their heads off, and it simply wasn't true. In fact, one of the researchers just said, apparently Governor Brewer lost her head over this one. But even presented repeatedly with the fact that it had never happened, she never backed down, never changed her story, and continued to insist that illegal immigrants were coming into Arizona and decapitating people. And she wasn't the only Arizona politician with this kind of sketchy connection to facts. Senator McCain has said for years that Phoenix is the #2 city in the United States for abductions. He has very publicly been corrected on that fact, and yet he still repeats that claim in political speeches. There are a lot of non-facts used both then and unfortunately in our recent presidential campaign year and then as president, particularly as regards immigrants. Though immigrants are blamed for high crime rates, for smuggling drugs, for rape and murder, the facts indicate that illegal immigrants commit many fewer violent crimes, fewer thefts, and even fewer traffic violations than the average American citizen, if for no other reason than the fact that they, of all people, don't want to have a run-in with the police. They are trying to be not noticed. And so if there's anyone on the road driving the speed limit, it's probably an illegal immigrant. It sure isn't me. In recent years, as the economy in the United States has failed to produce a lot of new jobs, the actual immigration flow has been from the United States back into Mexico, regardless of who actually pays for it. And it's got to be either the United States or Mexico, and it isn't going to be Mexico. So I don't know how much logical application you have to apply to that. But regardless of who pays for the wall, the irony of building a 30-foot wall between two nations when in fact immigration is in negative numbers, it prompted those naughty boys that produced South Park to do a totally tongue-in-cheek episode in which they claimed that we were building the wall to keep our cheap labor from escaping, that we were trying to keep them here. What the University of Michigan study was documenting was how often people will choose not to give up a mistaken prejudice in the presence of contradictory facts. And in fact, they will double down. That rather than even suffering self-doubt, they will strengthen their commitment to their ridiculous prejudice. 3 weeks ago, when President 45 tweeted that President Obama was a sick, bad man because he had ordered Trump Tower's phones tapped, every spy agency in the country insisted that it wasn't so. Rather than admit that he had been simply taken in by one of the many raving nutcases on Fox News the night before, he actually doubled down and said that Obama had gotten the British Secret Service to tap the phones at Trump Tower. This was such an insulting and preposterous claim that the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, David Cameron, quipped that for him, the best part of no longer being Prime Minister was that he didn't have to listen to Donald Trump's wiretap phone conversations anymore. Sadly, this Clementine Caligula, who now occupies the White House, keeps giving us so many examples of belief without facts that it is truly hard to keep up. His famous mistakes began when he insisted on the guilt of the Central Park Five, the Black and Latino teenagers who were falsely accused of raping a Central Park jogger in 1989. And even after these 5 young men were cleared through DNA evidence, the Donald still insists to this day, still insists that they're guilty, when the only evidence of their crime is that they're brown. And that's enough for him. He entered presidential politics with his attempt at discrediting America's first black president by insisting that he was born in Kenya. And even after Obama's birth certificate was made public, Donald insisted that it was fake, that it was not really proof of his birth in Hawaii, which, if you are born to an American citizen mother, whether your mother is on a cruise ship or living abroad, if you are born to an American citizen mother, you qualify as a natural-born American citizen. But that's a constitutional nuance that Donald is not capable of understanding. I mean, he spent lots of money and lots of airtime trying to say that Obama couldn't be president because he was born in Kenya, when we know his mother was a citizen and had absolutely nothing to do with anything. But why trouble him with information? Misinformation, mistaken beliefs, prejudices, and outright lies are so numerous that it's depressing for me. I have to write this stuff. I know you all think I'm just making this up as I go along, but I actually have to research this material, and it's depressing to keep looking at this list of lies. But I've got to say one more thing about the proposed budget. Our military budget in the United States is larger than the next 10 largest militaries in the world added together, and 8 of them are our allies. Still, Trump has proposed a $54 billion increase in military spending, and we're not at war. Our military spending is already crowding out healthcare, infrastructure, education, and other civil expenditures. I believe that you could build a case for reducing our military spending by 50 to 75%, and we could still safeguard our borders and still have one of the strongest militaries in the world. We have a nuclear arsenal capable of wiping out human life 10 times over on the planet. How much deader do people really need to be? I mean, we are a military force to be reckoned with. So this increase in military spending is not because we need it, it's because that's how you transfer money from the middle class to the upper class. It is investment in the industry of producing weapons. To help pay for this massive increase in spending, the Donald has asked to cut out all funding for the arts, for public television, and for national public radio. The Donald literally wants to fire Big Bird. He also wants to increase Homeland Security by $44 billion. So this is $100 billion of increases. How much do we spend on public TV and public radio? He's got $100 billion that he wants to increase in spending. Public TV and public radio is less than $500 million a year. It's just a tiny fraction, just a tiny fraction. But it gives him the excuse, and people of his ilk, to do what they've always wanted to do anyway, which is to gut the EPA, because the EPA is what keeps industries from dumping coal ash into our rivers and pollution into our air. He wants to be able to cut the education department because nothing serves a tyrant better than an uneducated public. But the most hypocritical of all is the suggestion that we cut funding to public broadcasting. Just a drop in the bucket of our federal budget. This is not a cost savings measure. This is an attempt to keep people from being informed. What he wants to give us is a completely unnecessary wall between the United States and Mexico, and for that we will lose arts, education, the EPA, public TV, radio, Meals on Wheels for our seniors, meals for children, hungry children in off-school hours, because feeding children has not turned in to results in higher grades. As if you would feed a hungry child in order to get results. How about the result of they're not hungry anymore? Why isn't that a result? All of this is like a caricature of what people like me have said about Republicans for 20 years. I mean, they have filched about how we liberals deride them and describe them as monsters with absolutely no ethics. And now this budget wants to put flesh on the bones of the caricature. They want to give it 3 dimensions and say, no, this is really who we are. We are really this heartless and mean. One gentleman whose funeral I did a few years ago said to me on his deathbed, he said, Roger, I make enough money to be a Republican. I'm just not that mean. I quoted that in his funeral. It's the only time, and I get a lot of hate mail, it was the only time I've gotten hate mail for a funeral. But I mean, there were people that were outraged that I had said that out loud, and I was just quoting the guy whose funeral we were having. But clearly, cutting public radio has absolutely nothing to do with saving money. It's about killing off a reliable news source. One of the administration's minions actually said, why should we ask the public to pay for another liberal news outlet when we already have MSNBC? 2 of the most prominent commentators on MSNBC were hired away from Fox. It's not like MSNBC is a reliable liberal news source. But what they're calling liberal is facts. I mean, NPR, if anything, has a decidedly corporatist lean to them. I mean, I don't look at them as having a liberal spin at all. If anything, they've got a pro-corporation spin, but they have a reliable reporting staff that tells us about what's going on in the world. Now, you can have conservative and liberal opinions, but you cannot have liberal and conservative facts. There's no way to say that information is liberal unless you've got something against information. When you are presented with facts that you do not like, that does not make it fake news. Things are not true because you want them to be true, and things are not false because you do not like them. The Buddha said, 3 things cannot be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. But by trying to cut out National Public Radio and public television, they're trying to hide the truth, and we shouldn't let them. If we were the kind of people who paid close attention to the liturgical year, we would have read the gospel lesson for the 4th Sunday of Lent, which is John chapter 9. And it's so long I didn't read it, but it's a story that you're familiar with. It's the story of the man born blind and all of the interactions that he had. And I don't think it's going to come as a shock to any of you to hear me say that the accounts in the Gospel of John are not historical. John is not trying to tell us about what happened. He is trying to teach us through a theological narrative. John wants to instruct our faith, not give us a peek into Jesus's day runner. It's not that he healed a man who had been born blind. It's that blindness represents a society that refuses to see. And in that John 9 account, the man who was born blind, once he's healed, runs into opposition and criticism from his own parents, from his neighbors, from his clergy, his church, his government. John's not telling us about a single healing incident. He's writing a commentary on an entire culture that prefers blindness to being aware, to being able to see. That is really what this Michigan State study was about. They were trying to answer the difficult question, why do Americans prefer to be blind? Why is ignorance preferable to us rather than giving up worn-out beliefs. I was just 24 years old when I heard Ronald Reagan say that he was going to cut taxes, increase military spending, and balance the budget, all at the same time. And I was a kid with a brand spanking new degree in philosophy, which doesn't teach you a lot about math. But I knew that what he was saying could not be done. It sounded nice, but it didn't participate in reality. He may as well have said that he was going to replace gasoline-burning cars with flying unicorns, because the kind of people who would believe that you can cut taxes, balance the budget, and increase spending at the same time would believe that they could fly on a unicorn. This past year, when Donald Trump said that he was going to cut taxes, increase military spending, and reduce the deficit, at this point, I don't think even the flying unicorn voters believed him. And yet he polished it a little bit. May I say that he polished the turd? Is that going too far? Forgive me if that's too far. But the image appeals to me. He did that thing and said that he was going to get rid of Obamacare and give health insurance to everyone for a fraction of the cost, and it was going to be better coverage. And millions of people fell for that. I love this quote that Pat read from Mark Twain. Education is the path from cock ignorance to miserable uncertainty. The only people who can be that sure of themselves have to be ignorant. It would be nice to believe that you could cut healthcare spending and get more healthcare, but then there's this thing, this math thing, that while it may be difficult, it is yet persistent and will not go away. Like every other tyrant, our current president wants you to be uninformed. I was alarmed recently. I read an article by a South Carolina professor that I've never met, but someone asked her, what are the 3 most reliable news sources that you know of? And she named NPR, Democracy Now!, and Roger Ray. No, seriously, don't applaud that. That's crazy. I'm not a news source. I'm a corpulent cleric with lots of opinions that you should pay attention to. But the notion that church becomes a more reliable news source than ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, and I can actually understand why she said that. I can understand it. An uninformed public is easier to control with propaganda. The proposal to do away with public broadcasting is an attempt to take away a source of education, to take away from the public a source of information. 3 things cannot be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And if someone wants to keep you from seeing the sun or the moon or knowing the truth, that person is not your friend, and may I say, does not deserve to be your president. So I guess I can say that this is my Save NPR sermon. But more than that, it's a plea for you to strive to remain informed. Don't be seduced by promises of pie in the sky. Be willing to change your views in light of new information. Emily Dickinson said, "We both believe and disbelieve 100 times an hour, and that keeps believing nimble." If you believe exactly the same things that you believed 5 years ago, then you are already brain dead. Keep your minds nimble. Listen to NPR. Make it a part of your daily diet, and don't let anyone take it away from you. Expose yourself to ideas and information that are contrary to what you already believe. Change your mind. Grow. Challenge authority, even if it scares you. Keep doing it until it doesn't scare you anymore. And then keep doing it until you like it. And if you can, join me. Keep doing it until you're addicted to doing it. Don't let propaganda intellectually kill you by starving you of the facts. Be curious. Be disobedient. Be defiant. And think while it's still legal to do so.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.